Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to facet this little crystal point tip of Topaz, which has a nice orangey yellow color to it. And I've oriented it slightly askew so I'm not cutting on the cleavage plane, which is important. And it has this kind of diamond shape, so I'm going to cut a simple Marquise, which is essentially a sharp-ended oval. These are the cutting instructions, fairly straightforward. Although the refractive index is for quartz 1.54, whereas the refractive index for Topaz is 1.6 something, so quartz is 154, and so the angles on that are 42 and 43 for the crown and pavilion, and Topaz is, 163, I guess. And those angles are 43 and 39 for the sort of main facet angles. And so I'm going to have to adjust my diagram, which I've done here. So just a summary of the differences. It is a 4-degree difference in the pavilion and just a 1-degree difference in the crown. And so I've modified the angles on the diagram here, essentially subtracting 4 from the pavilion, although that number is not right. So subtracting 4 from the pavilion on all of the numbers of the angles, and then on the crown adding 1 to everything. And so this will give the best, yield in terms of brightness and sparkle in the design. And for this design, those two flat faces are at 96 and 48, and it just worked out pretty conveniently that my crystal was oriented about that way. Sort of the shorter side is 96 and 48, and the other sides will be 24 and 72. And so I've got a master lap with this is a 1200 grit topper, although I go down to a 600 grit. And when using a topper, the screw has a double-sided end to it, and you want sort of the jutting out side to go down so it lines up around that topper and holds it in place better. And I've got my handpiece set to 90 degrees to do the girdle, where I just have to lower the pan out of the way now, and then I'll lower the pad in a minute after adding a splash pan, so that the water doesn't go everywhere, because you essentially have to lower the splash pan below the height of the topper to cut the girdle. So I'm lowering the mast here, or not the mast, lowering the platform, there we go, that's the word for it. Starting water, and this is just an example of how fast I go. I kind of have started cutting around 600 RPMs on my machine, and away we go. And this is after cutting in on 1200 for the girdle, setting the size of the stone essentially. There is a small portion that I'll have to cut down to make it actually flat. And now I've cut in sort of the main facets on the pavilion side, so it's ready to go. We've got our Marquise shape all sorted. And now I can cut in the other facets. This is, I think, a 600 topper, cutting them in, and I'm starting on sort of the long, elongated side facets there that I have to bring down to the girdle. And here they are, all at 1200 grit. And now it's time for polishing them. This is the speed that I go. It's not sped up or slowed down, just a very slight drip of water, a little bit of diamond, 50,000 diamond grit on the tin lap here. And that's all I need to polish up from after a 1200 topper. And you can see that long triangle is polished, whereas the other ones weren't. And now the pavilion is totally polished, and I can transfer to another dop and start on the crown in a second here. And here it's transferred, and you can see just the bottom part of the girdle is polished. You don't have to polish the whole thing. And you do that by just setting the angle at about 89.5 or so it only polishes the top part of the girdle. And here the crown, I've roughed in the cuts just to see that they're aligned and are flat and parallel to the girdle that I established before, which they were. So I cut them down to size, and I think this is polished to a 1200 grit. And I started cutting in the side facets. There's a small triangle there that's a crown 3 facet that I cut down another facet to meet. And so we flip it over, and on the other side you can see I've cut in those facets already. There's 2 crown parallel facets above the girdle line, and I think there'll be one more, and then the table is all that I have to cut in. And in the background I was drying off the lap. And so here they are all cut in with a 1200 top down to a 1200 grit and just about ready to polish. And this is it, all polished up in a little more natural light. And then removed from the dop, it's still a very nice orangey yellow and is a very nice stone. And now it's time to figure out how much it weighs. And doesn't focus on it, but we'll just weigh it, and we are at 0.58 carats. Topaz is an 8 on the hardness scale, and it's actually one of sort of the keystone minerals on that scale, so it's, it defines number 8. But despite its hardness, it actually polishes up relatively quickly and cuts fast, although this was a small stone, so maybe if it was a larger stone it would have taken longer. I found going just from a 600 to a 1200 grit and then polish was all I needed to cut and get everything lined up where I wanted it on this stone.